Margaret pulled her old Toyota into the parking lot of the Riverside Country Club and immediately felt out of place. Rows of sleek Mercedes, BMWs, and even a few Bentleys sparkled under the evening lights. Her car looked like it belonged in a different world entirely. She sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, wondering if she should just turn around and go home. But she had promised herself she would come. This charity gala was being held in memory of her late husband's business partner, Mr. Henderson, who had passed away 6 months ago. Even though it had been 15 years since her own husband died, she still felt obligated to honor these old connections. She took a deep breath, grabbed her worn leather purse, and stepped out of the car. The October evening air was crisp, and Margaret smoothed down her simple floral dress. It was clean and pressed, but definitely not designer. Her canvas shoes had seen better days, but they were comfortable, and at 68 years old, comfort mattered more than fashion to her. At least that's what she told herself. As she walked toward the entrance, a young valet rushed past her, clearly assuming she wasn't important enough to assist. He held the door open for a couple behind her, dressed in expensive evening wear, their jewelry catching the light. Margaret quietly slipped in behind them unnoticed. The grand ballroom took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over everything. Round tables covered in white linens were decorated with elaborate flower arrangements that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery bills. Women in elegant gowns and men in tailored suits mingled near the bar, their laughter echoing off the marble floors. Margaret stood near the entrance, clutching her invitation, suddenly feeling very small. A woman in a sharp black dress and a clipboard approached her. Her name tag read, Victoria Ashford, Event Coordinator. She looked Margaret up and down with barely concealed disapproval. "Can I help you?" Victoria asked, her tone making it clear she thought Margaret had wandered in by mistake. "Yes. I'm here for the gala," Margaret replied softly, offering her invitation. Victoria took it, examined it as if checking for forgery, and then let out a small, tight smile. "I see. Well, we're almost at capacity. Let me find you a seat." Margaret followed Victoria through the crowd, aware of the eyes following her. She heard whispers, saw the subtle nudges, and noticed how people's conversations seemed to pause as she passed. Victoria led her all the way to the back of the ballroom, near the swinging kitchen doors, to a table that was clearly the least desirable spot in the room. "This should work for you," Victoria said, not even trying to hide her condescension. "Enjoy your evening." Margaret sat down alone at a table for 8. The other chairs remained empty as guests arrived and were seated elsewhere. She watched as Victoria personally escorted well-dressed attendees to the front tables, laughing and chatting with them like old friends. The contrast wasn't lost on Margaret. A waiter came by with champagne on a silver tray. He offered glasses to the neighboring table but walked right past Margaret without even making eye contact. She didn't say anything. She'd learned long ago that making a fuss rarely changed people's minds about you. The cocktail hour began, and Margaret decided to walk around and look at the silent auction items displayed along the side walls. There were vacation packages, spa treatments, jewelry, and several pieces of art. One painting caught her eye, a simple watercolor of a garden that reminded her of the one she used to tend with her husband. The starting bid was $500, and only 2 people had bid so far. She picked up the pen to add her name when she felt a presence beside her. A woman in a shimmering gold dress and more diamonds than Margaret had ever seen in one place stood there, looking at her with amusement. "Oh, honey," the woman said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "That might be a bit out of your range. There are some lovely items at the other end, coffee baskets, movie tickets, that sort of thing. Much more reasonable." Margaret felt her cheeks warm, but she kept her voice steady. "I'd like to bid on this one, thank you." The woman laughed, actually laughed, and physically stepped in front of Margaret, blocking her access to the bid sheet. "I don't think you understand. This auction is for serious collectors. We can't have people bidding who can't follow through." She wrote down a bid of $2,000, effectively pricing Margaret out, then walked away without another word. Margaret stood there, staring at the painting. She could easily bid $20,000 if she wanted to, or buy the painting outright. But she didn't. That wasn't why she was here. She moved on to look at other items, her heart heavy. At another table, she picked up a brochure about the charity the evening was supporting, a foundation that helped women start small businesses. It was good work, important work. She was reading through the information when she heard voices behind her. "Did you see that woman in the floral dress?" Someone whispered, not quietly enough. "I know. Victoria told me she actually has a legitimate invitation. Can you imagine?" Well, Henderson did always have a soft spot for charity cases. Maybe she's one of his pet projects. They giggled, and Margaret felt something inside her chest tighten. She'd dealt with this kind of treatment before, especially in the years right after her husband died. Back then, people who had once treated her like royalty suddenly acted like she didn't exist. It taught her everything she needed to know about fair-weather friends. Dinner was announced, and Margaret returned to her isolated table. As plates of food were served, she noticed that her meal came out last, and the server practically tossed it in front of her, without the careful presentation others received. The food was good, though cold by the time it reached her, but she ate quietly, watching the room. The program began with speeches about Mr. Henderson's legacy and the importance of the charity. Margaret listened, genuinely moved by some of the stories shared by women whose businesses had been saved by the foundation's grants. This was real impact, real change in people's lives. It reminded her of why she'd chosen the path she'd been on for the past 15 years. When the live auction started, an antique watch was brought out, a beautiful piece that had belonged to Mr. Henderson himself. The bidding started at $10,000. Margaret watched as the same people who had ignored or mocked her all evening competed aggressively for it, driving the price up to $45,000. The winner, a man in an expensive suit, raised his paddle triumphantly while everyone applauded. Margaret wondered if any of them actually cared about Mr. Henderson, or if they just wanted to be seen as generous. She suspected it was the latter. As the evening wound down, Margaret prepared to leave. She stood, picked up her purse, and walked toward the exit. Near the door, she saw Victoria talking to a group of women, probably discussing how successful the event had been. As Margaret passed, Victoria's voice carried clearly. "Well, we did our duty. Sometimes you have to let everyone in, even if they don't quite fit the atmosphere we're trying to create. But between us, we raised good money, and that's what matters." The other women murmured in agreement, and one of them glanced at Margaret with that same pitying look she'd been getting all night. Margaret stepped out into the cool night air and walked to her car. As she drove home through the quiet streets, she thought about the evening. Nothing that happened had surprised her. She'd seen it all before, experienced it dozens of times over the years. That was exactly why she kept living the way she did. People's true character came out when they thought you had nothing to offer them. Tonight had simply confirmed what she already knew about the world. But it also reminded her why her work mattered, why she'd chosen to live simply despite having more money than everyone in that ballroom combined. Tomorrow, she'd wake up in her modest house, make her simple breakfast, and continue living the life she'd chosen. A life that would have made her husband proud. A life that kept her grounded in what truly mattered. As she pulled into her driveway, Margaret smiled to herself. These people had no idea who they'd just dismissed. And that was exactly how she wanted it, at least for now. The following Tuesday morning, Margaret woke up with a purpose. Her granddaughter Lucy's birthday was coming up in 2 weeks, and she wanted to get her something special. Lucy was turning 16, and Margaret remembered how important that birthday felt when she was young. She'd been thinking about getting her a nice handbag, something quality that would last, something Lucy could take to college in a few years. After breakfast, Margaret drove downtown to Ellington Avenue, where all the upscale shops were located. She rarely came to this part of the city, but she knew exactly which store she wanted to visit. Belmont & Co. was known for their beautiful leather goods, and several months ago, Lucy had mentioned admiring one of their bags in a magazine. Margaret found street parking and fed the meter with quarters from her coin purse. As she walked toward the boutique, she passed other stores with elaborate window displays and doormen in uniforms. Belmont & Co. was in the middle of the block, its windows showcasing handbags on white pedestals like they were pieces of art. The moment Margaret pushed open the heavy glass door, she felt the atmosphere change. Soft classical music played in the background, and the air smelled like expensive leather and perfume. Everything was white and gold, minimal and modern. 3 sales associates stood behind a long counter, all dressed in black with perfect makeup and hair. One of them, a tall woman with her hair pulled back in a severe bun, looked up. Her eyes traveled from Margaret's simple cardigan to her practical shoes, and her expression shifted from professional smile to something much colder. This was Celeste Warner, the store manager, though Margaret didn't know that yet. Margaret walked slowly through the store, looking at the displays. The handbags were beautiful, each one displayed individually with a small card showing the name and price. She found several styles she thought Lucy might like, ranging from $1,500 to $4,000. She was examining a navy blue crossbody bag when she noticed Celeste had moved closer, pretending to adjust a display but clearly watching her. Another associate had also shifted position, now standing near the exit. Margaret had seen this before. They thought she was going to steal something. She ignored the discomfort and continued browsing. When she picked up the navy bag to feel the leather quality, Celeste appeared at her elbow immediately. "That's a very expensive piece," Celeste said sharply. $3,200. Real Italian leather. "It's lovely," Margaret replied calmly. "I'm looking for a birthday gift for my granddaughter." Celeste's smile was thin and didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. We have a wonderful selection of accessories that might be more appropriate. Keychains, card holders, small pouches. Those start around $60. Margaret set down the navy bag carefully. "I'd like to see a few more bags, actually. Maybe something in brown or tan." Celeste's expression tightened. "Madam, I'm not sure you understand. These handbags are luxury items. They're quite costly. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the department stores at the mall. They have very nice options there, much more reasonably priced." "I understand the prices," Margaret said quietly. "I'd still like to see a few options." The other two associates had stopped even pretending to work and were watching now. One of them whispered something to the other, and they both smirked. Margaret felt that familiar tightness in her chest but kept her face calm. Celeste crossed her arms. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, but we're a high-end boutique. We cater to a specific clientele. I can't have my staff spending time pulling items for someone who, well, frankly, I don't think you're here to make a purchase." "I am here to make a purchase," Margaret said, her voice still gentle but firm. "I'd like to see bags suitable for a teenage girl, quality pieces that will last. My budget is around $3,000 to $4,000. Celeste actually laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Your budget is $4,000? Ma'am, look at yourself. Your purse is falling apart. Your shoes are from a discount store and that sweater has seen better days. Now I'm going to have to ask you to either make a purchase from our affordable items or leave the store. You're making our other customers uncomfortable." Margaret glanced around. There were no other customers in the store. "There's no one else here." "Exactly," Celeste said, raising her voice. "And there won't be if word gets out that we let just anyone browse. This is an exclusive boutique. We have standards. I'm going to have to insist that you leave now or I'll call security." The two other associates had moved closer, forming a sort of wall. Margaret looked at all three of them, these young women who had decided her worth based on her appearance. She could pull out her phone right now and show them her bank balance. She could tell them exactly who she was. But what would that prove? "I understand," Margaret said softly. She set down the bag she'd been holding and walked toward the door. As she passed, she heard one of the associates mutter, "Some people have no self-awareness." Margaret stepped out onto the street, the door closing behind her with a soft click. She stood there for a moment, letting the autumn breeze cool her flushed cheeks. She'd been dismissed, insulted, and thrown out, all for the crime of not looking wealthy enough. She walked back to her car, no longer interested in shopping. She'd order something nice for Lucy online instead. That afternoon, Margaret had a routine appointment at her bank to sign some paperwork regarding one of her investment accounts. She'd been banking at First National for 30 years, long before her husband made his fortune. And she'd stayed loyal even when private banks had tried to woo her with promises of special treatment. The branch was busy when she arrived. Margaret took a number and sat in the waiting area, watching people come and go. After about 20 minutes, her number was called and she walked up to the counter. The teller was young, maybe mid-20s, with perfectly styled hair and a bored expression. Her name tag said Bethany. She looked up at Margaret with barely disguised impatience. "How can I help you?" Bethany asked, already glancing at the line behind Margaret, clearly hoping this would be quick. "I need to speak with someone about my investment account," Margaret explained. "I have an appointment with Mr. Patterson's office." Bethany frowned. "Investment accounts? Those are handled by the wealth management department upstairs. Are you sure you have an investment account with us? Yes, I've had it for many years. What's your name? Margaret Chen. Bethany typed on her computer and her frown deepened. I'm not seeing... Wait, do you mean a savings account? Those are different from investment accounts. No, I mean my investment account. I received a letter last week asking me to come in to sign updated paperwork. Bethany sighed, clearly annoyed now. Ma'am, wealth management clients usually bank in the private suite. Are you sure you're in the right place? Maybe you have us confused with another bank. Margaret pulled the letter from her purse and showed it to Bethany. The young woman barely glanced at it. Look, I have other customers waiting. Why don't you have a seat and I'll see if someone can figure this out? Bethany waved to the next person in line, completely dismissing Margaret. Margaret stepped aside, confused. She sat back down in the waiting area. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. She watched as Bethany helped customer after customer, laughing and chatting with the younger, better-dressed clients, giving them her full attention. Finally, Margaret stood and approached the desk of a senior banker she recognized. Mr. Rodriguez, he'd been at this branch for years. Hello, Antonio, she said softly. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm having trouble with my appointment. Antonio Rodriguez looked up and his face immediately brightened. Mrs. Chen, I didn't see you come in. Is someone helping you? I tried to check in with the teller, but there seems to be some confusion. Antonio's expression darkened. He glanced over at Bethany, then back at Margaret. Please come with me. I'll take you up to wealth management myself. As they walked toward the elevator, Margaret heard Bethany ask another banker, Who is that lady? Why is Mr. Rodriguez treating her like she's important? The other banker, an older woman named Helen, whispered back loudly enough for Margaret to hear. That's Margaret Chen. She's one of the bank's largest clients. Her accounts are worth, well, let's just say more than you'll make in your entire career. Margaret didn't turn around, but she felt Bethany's eyes boring into her back. Antonio escorted her upstairs to the wealth management suite, a quiet, elegant space that looked nothing like the busy branch below. He apologized profusely for the confusion and made sure she was comfortable before leaving her with her account manager. The meeting took only 20 minutes. Margaret signed the necessary papers, discussed some charitable giving strategies, and was offered tea and cookies, which she politely declined. When she finished, she took the elevator back down to the main floor. As the doors opened, she saw Bethany at her counter looking nervous. Their eyes met for just a second before Bethany quickly looked away, her face red. Margaret walked through the lobby and out to her car. Twice in one day she'd been judged and found wanting, all because of how she looked. It was exhausting. As she drove home, she thought about how different her life could be if she wanted it to be. She could shop in designer clothes, drive a luxury car, live in a mansion with staff. People would fall over themselves to help her, to be near her, to treat her with respect. But they'd be respecting her money, not her. They'd be kind to her wealth, not to who she actually was. And after 15 years of living this way, Margaret had learned to tell the difference between genuine kindness and self-interested flattery. That evening, as she made herself dinner in her small kitchen, her phone rang. It was Diane Morrison, an old acquaintance who served on various charity boards around the city. They hadn't spoken in months. Margaret, darling, I hope I'm not calling it a bad time. Diane's voice came through, sweet as honey. Not at all. How are you, Diane? Wonderful, wonderful. Listen, I'm calling because I'm on the committee for the Women's Entrepreneurship Foundation. You remember Mr. Henderson's charity. We're planning our annual gala and we're pulling together tea. Planning committee. I thought of you and I'd love to have you join us. We need all the help we can get, and I remember you always had such wonderful ideas. Margaret paused. The Women's Entrepreneurship Foundation was the same organization that had hosted the gala where she'd been humiliated the week before. And Diane was asking her to join the planning committee? The committee meetings are starting next week, Diane continued. We meet at different members' homes. Very casual, very fun. What do you say? Margaret thought about saying no. She could easily decline and avoid putting herself in another situation where she'd be looked down on. But something made her hesitate. The foundation did good work, real good work. Maybe she could help even if the other committee members didn't appreciate it. Yes, Margaret said. I'd like to join. Wonderful. I'll send you the details. Our first meeting is at Victoria Ashford's home next Thursday at 10. You remember Victoria, don't you? Margaret remembered Victoria very well. Yes, I do. Perfect. See you then? After hanging up, Margaret sat at her kitchen table, her simple dinner getting cold. She knew what she was walking into, but sometimes she thought you had to walk through the fire to create real change, and she had a feeling that things were about to get very interesting. Thursday morning arrived cold and gray. Margaret dressed carefully in a simple navy skirt and cream blouse. Nothing fancy but clean and pressed. She knew exactly what kind of reception awaited her at Victoria Ashford's home, but she'd made a commitment, and Margaret Chen kept her commitments. Victoria's house was in Maple Ridge, the most expensive neighborhood in the city. Margaret drove through streets lined with massive homes, each one more impressive than the last. Perfect lawns, circular driveways, fountains, and gates. She finally found Victoria's address, a colonial-style mansion with white columns and black shutters that probably cost more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. Several luxury cars were already parked in the circular driveway. Margaret pulled her old Toyota in beside a gleaming Range Rover and felt that familiar sense of not belonging. But she got out anyway, straightened her shoulders, and walked to the front door. She rang the bell and waited. Through the frosted glass, she could see a figure approaching. The door swung open, and there stood Victoria, dressed in elegant casual wear that probably cost $1,000, but was designed to look effortless. Victoria's expression went from welcoming to confused to barely concealed horror in about 3 seconds. Margaret, she said, as if maybe she'd gotten the name wrong. Hello, Victoria. Diane invited me to join the committee. Victoria's smile was frozen, fake. Did she? How? Lovely. Well, come in, I suppose. The inside of the house was exactly what Margaret expected. Marble floors, a dramatic staircase, artwork on every wall, and fresh flowers on every surface. Victoria led her through the foyer to a large sitting room, where 6 other women were already gathered, sitting on expensive furniture, holding delicate teacups. The conversation stopped the moment Margaret entered. Every pair of eyes turned to her, and the looks ranged from surprise to confusion to outright disdain. Everyone. This is Margaret Chen, Victoria announced, her tone making it clear she was as puzzled as everyone else. She's joining our committee. Hello, Margaret said quietly. A few women nodded politely but said nothing. One of them was Diane, who gave Margaret a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Another was the woman in the gold dress from the gala, whose name Margaret learned was Patricia Holbrook. And sitting by the window was Celeste, the boutique manager who had thrown her out of the store just days ago. Celeste's face went pale when she recognized Margaret. She quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in her teacup. Please sit, Victoria said, gesturing to a small chair that was slightly apart from the main seating area. It was clear where Margaret ranked in this group. Margaret sat and accepted a cup of tea from a uniformed staff member who poured it without making eye contact. The other women resumed their conversation as if Margaret wasn't there, discussing their recent vacations, upcoming social events, and whose children were getting into which prestigious universities. After about 15 minutes of small talk, Victoria clapped her hands together. All right, ladies, let's get down to business. As you all know, the Women's Entrepreneurship Foundation is facing some challenges. Challenges? Patricia laughed. Victoria, let's be honest. We're in trouble. Big trouble. Victoria's smile tightened. We're facing headwinds, yes. Our last 3 events haven't met their fundraising goals. Attendance has been declining. And quite frankly, our reputation has taken a hit after the Henderson incident. Margaret had heard about this. Mr. Henderson, the founder, had been accused of some minor financial impropriety in his personal business before he died. It was later proven to be false, but the scandal had tarnished the foundation's image by association. We need to raise $2 million by the end of the year, or we'll have to shut down several programs, Diane added, looking worried. That means cutting grants to at least 30 small businesses run by women who are counting on us. The room fell quiet. These were real stakes, real people who would be hurt. Margaret felt a pang in her chest thinking about those 30 women who might lose their support. So what's the plan? Asked a woman named Constance, who wore so many rings her fingers looked heavy. Victoria pulled out a folder. We're planning our annual gala for December. If we can make it spectacular, really bring in the high rollers, we might be able to raise the money we need. But it has to be perfect. Better than perfect. What's the budget? Patricia asked. That's the problem, Victoria admitted. We only have about 50,000 to work with. Previous galas cost twice that. 50,000? Constance looked horrified. That's impossible. We can't throw a gala worth attending on that budget. The women began talking over each other, throwing out ideas that were quickly shot down. Hire a cheaper caterer, cut the entertainment, reduce the guest list. Nothing seemed right. Margaret listened quietly, her mind working. She'd been involved in charity work for years, though always behind the scenes. She knew exactly what this organization needed, and it had nothing to do with cutting corners. Finally, during a lull in the conversation, she spoke up. What if we thought bigger instead of smaller? The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at her as if they'd forgotten she was there. Excuse me, Victoria said, her tone dripping with condescension. Instead of trying to do a smaller version of past events, what if we aimed higher? Change the whole approach. Make it something people actually want to attend. Patricia laughed, not kindly. And how exactly would you suggest we do that with $50,000? Margaret leaned forward slightly. First, we need to understand why people stopped coming. It's not just the scandal. These events have become predictable. The same people, the same format, the same boring speeches. People don't want to sit through another rubber chicken dinner. They want to feel connected to the cause. We do connect people to the cause, Victoria said defensively. We show videos and have speakers. But do you introduce them to the actual women you're helping? Do you let people see the real impact of their money? We're not running some kind of poverty showcase, Constance sniffed. Our donors expect elegance. Elegance and authenticity aren't mutually exclusive, Margaret said calmly. What if instead of one big gala we hosted an intimate evening where donors could actually meet the women entrepreneurs, hear their stories firsthand, see their products, make it interactive, real, memorable? That's a terrible idea, Patricia said flatly. Our donors don't want to be made uncomfortable by sob stories. They want to drink champagne, bid on auction items, and feel good about writing a check. Maybe that's why donations are declining, Margaret replied softly. Maybe people are tired of empty gestures. Victoria's face was turning red. Margaret, I appreciate that you're trying to help, but those of us who have been involved in high society fundraising for years understand how these things work. Our donors have certain expectations. They're used to a certain level of sophistication. I'm just suggesting we try something different. Different doesn't mean better, Celeste spoke up, finally finding her voice. She still wouldn't meet Margaret's eyes directly. Victoria is right. We need to stick with what works. But it's not working, Margaret pointed out. You just said you're about to shut down programs. That's temporary, Victoria snapped. Once we get past this rough patch, things will go back to normal. What we don't need is some inexperienced person coming in and suggesting we turn our elegant fundraiser into some kind of circus. The other women murmured in agreement. Margaret could see she was outnumbered. Diane tried to smooth things over. I think what Margaret is trying to say is that we should think creatively. But she's right that we need to be realistic. Victoria, what's your proposal? Victoria launched into a detailed plan that was essentially a cheaper version of every gala they'd done before. Smaller venue, less expensive wine, fewer staff, cut costs everywhere while trying to maintain the illusion of luxury. It was a plan destined to fail, and Margaret could see it clearly. As Victoria talked, Margaret did some quick math in her head. To really save this foundation, they didn't need $2 million. They needed at least $5 million. 2 to cover the immediate shortfall, 3 to create an endowment that would make them sustainable long-term. And they needed to completely rebuild their reputation. What if we raised the goal to $10 million? Margaret said quietly. The room erupted in laughter. Even Diane, who had invited her, was giggling behind her hand. 10 million? Patricia could barely get the words out between laughs. Sweetheart, we'd be lucky to raise $500,000 with the budget and time we have. But if we changed the approach, brought in new donors, created something people actually believed in. Margaret? Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp. I've been doing this for 15 years. My husband is on the board of 3 major corporations. I know everyone worth knowing in this city. And I'm telling you that 10 million is not just unrealistic, it's laughable. You clearly don't understand how philanthropy works at this level. People like us, Constance added, have spent years building relationships with donors. You can't just walk in and think you know better. I'm not saying I know better, Margaret said, keeping her voice level. I'm just offering ideas. Ideas that show you're out of your depth, Victoria replied. Look, it's clear Diane invited you because she has a kind heart, and that's admirable. But these committee meetings are for people who understand high society fundraising, people who move in certain circles, people who—" She paused, looking Margaret up and down. "People who have the background and connections to make a real difference." The meaning was crystal clear. Margaret wasn't the right kind of person. She didn't belong. "Perhaps you could help in other ways," Diane suggested gently, trying to soften the blow. "We'll need volunteers at the event itself. Coat check, registration table, that sort of thing. Those roles are very important too. Envelope stuffing," Celeste added, a slight smirk on her face. "That's always needed." Margaret sat back in her chair, looking at these 7 women. Women who had no idea who she really was. Women who were about to lose the foundation they claimed to care about, because they were too proud and too foolish to accept help from someone they deemed beneath them. She could tell them right now. She could pull out her phone, show them her bank accounts, watch their faces change from condescension to shock to desperate flattery. But she didn't. Not yet. "I understand," Margaret said simply. The meeting continued for another hour. Plans were made, tasks were assigned, and Margaret was given a list of addresses where she could drop off donation request letters. Busy work, work that kept her out of the way. As the meeting broke up, the women gathered their designer purses and said their goodbyes. They made plans for lunch dates and shopping trips, pointedly not including Margaret in any of them. Celeste left quickly, still avoiding eye contact. Margaret was the last to leave. Victoria walked her to the door with a tight smile. "I hope you understand, Margaret. It's nothing personal. It's just that this work requires a certain expertise, a certain level of social standing. I'm sure you're a very nice person, but perhaps this just isn't the right fit for you." Margaret looked at Victoria for a long moment. "We'll see," she said softly. As she drove home, Margaret's mind was spinning. She'd watched the foundation struggle, because these women were more concerned with maintaining their social status than actually helping people. They'd rather watch it fail than accept ideas from someone they considered inferior. She thought about those 30 women who would lose their grants. Women trying to build businesses, support their families, create better lives. They'd become collateral damage in the egos and social games of the wealthy. Margaret pulled into her driveway and sat in her car for a moment. She'd given these committee members a chance to do the right thing. They'd chosen to dismiss her instead. Now it was time to show them exactly who they'd been dismissing. And it was time to save a foundation that did important work, whether they wanted her help or not. She pulled out her phone and made a call to her attorney, James Patterson. It was time to stop hiding and start fixing things. But she was going to do it her way, on her terms, and these women were about to learn a lesson about judging people by their appearance. 3 weeks passed after that humiliating committee meeting. Margaret went about her quiet life, but behind the scenes she was making moves. Phone calls to her attorney, meetings with her financial advisors, research into the Women's Entrepreneurship Foundation's actual financial state, which turned out to be even worse than the committee knew. Then, on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, Margaret received a panicked call from Diane. "Margaret, we have a crisis." Diane's voice was shaking. "An absolute crisis. I need you to come to an emergency committee meeting tonight at Victoria's house. 7 o'clock. Can you make it?" "What happened?" Margaret asked. "I can't explain over the phone. Just please come. We need everyone." That evening, Margaret drove back to Maple Ridge. The weather matched the mood. Dark clouds, steady rain, wind shaking the trees. When she arrived at Victoria's house, several cars were already there, parked haphazardly as if their owners had been in a rush. Victoria opened the door, and Margaret barely recognized her. The perfectly composed woman from before looked exhausted. Her hair wasn't styled, she wore plain clothes, and her eyes were red-rimmed. "Thank you for coming," Victoria said, and she actually sounded sincere. The sitting room where they had met before was now filled with anxiety. All 7 committee members were there, along with 2 men in suits Margaret didn't recognize. The atmosphere was completely different from the last meeting. No one was sipping tea or chatting about vacations. They all looked worried, some looked scared. "Margaret, please sit," Diane said, gesturing to the same small chair as before. Victoria stood at the front of the room, wringing her hands. "I suppose I should just say it. The Chandler Foundation, our largest donor, has withdrawn their support, effective immediately. Gasps filled the room. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Constance looked like she might faint. How much were they giving us? Margaret asked quietly. $5 million, one of the men in suits answered. He introduced himself as Leonard Chang, the foundation's treasurer. That's over the next 3 years. But they've pulled out completely. No transition period, no partial funding, nothing. But why? Celeste asked, her voice small. What did we do? According to their letter, Leonard continued, they're restructuring their giving priorities. But between you and me, I think they're nervous about being associated with us after all the negative publicity. This is a disaster, Patricia said, stating the obvious. We can't possibly make up that shortfall. We'll have to shut down. Completely. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. We've worked for years to build this foundation. My mother-in-law founded it 25 years ago. And now, because of one stupid scandal that wasn't even true, it's all going to fall apart. For the first time, Margaret saw real emotion from Victoria. This wasn't about social standing or looking good at parties. She actually cared about the foundation, about the work it did. How long do we have? Margaret asked. The other man in a suit spoke up. He was Robert Fletcher, the foundation's attorney. We need to show the board that we can remain solvent. If we can't demonstrate a path to financial stability by the end of the month, they'll vote to dissolve the organization. That's 3 weeks from today. 3 weeks to replace $5 million? Constance shook her head. It's impossible. Not just $5 million, Leonard added grimly. We also have operating expenses, and with donations declining, we're looking at a total need of about $7 million just to keep the doors open and honor our existing commitments. The room fell into stunned silence. These women who had been so confident, so dismissive, now looked lost. Margaret watched them, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to say, I told you so. But mostly, she felt sad for the women entrepreneurs who would suffer because of this. We could try to get loans, Diane suggested weakly. No bank will loan to us in our current state, Robert replied. And even if they would, we couldn't service the debt. What about other donors? Patricia asked. Can't we call everyone we know? Have a massive phone campaign? Victoria laughed bitterly. I've spent the last 3 days calling every wealthy person I know. I've begged, Patricia. Actually begged. Do you know what that's like for me? And do you know what I got? Polite excuses. Every single one. There has to be something we can do, Celeste said, and Margaret noticed she was crying quietly. That's when Margaret spoke up. There is something you can do. Everyone turned to look at her. In all the panic, they'd almost forgotten she was there. Margaret, unless you know a billionaire willing to write a check, Victoria said tiredly. I don't think I can help, Margaret said simply. But before I explain how, I need to call my attorney. Would it be all right if he joined us? The committee members exchanged confused glances. Victoria shrugged. Sure, why not? Everything else is falling apart anyway. Margaret pulled out her phone and made a call. James, it's Margaret. I'm at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. Can you come over? Yes, now. Bring the documents we discussed. Thank you. Who's James? Diane asked. My attorney, Margaret replied. He'll be here in about 20 minutes. He doesn't live far. The wait was awkward. The committee members whispered among themselves, clearly wondering what Margaret thought she could possibly do. Patricia even said loud enough for Margaret to hear, What's her attorney going to do? Sue someone to save us? When the doorbell rang, Victoria went to answer it. She returned with a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. James Patterson was in his 50s, distinguished looking. The kind of lawyer who clearly dealt with high-level clients. Ladies, gentlemen, he nodded professionally. I'm James Patterson from Patterson & Associates. Victoria's eyes widened. Patterson & Associates was one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. She looked at Margaret with new confusion. James set his briefcase on the coffee table and pulled out a folder. Mrs. Chen has asked me to present some information to this committee. With your permission? Mrs. Chen? Constance repeated, looking at Margaret. I thought your name was Margaret Chen. It is, Margaret said. Margaret Chen. But some people knew my husband and me as Margaret and David Chen Zhao. The name meant nothing to most of them at first. But Leonard, the treasurer, suddenly sat up straight. Chen Zhao? As in David Chen Zhao? The tech entrepreneur? That's correct. James replied. David Chenzhao founded DataStream Technologies in 1995. When he passed away 15 years ago, he left his entire estate to his wife, Margaret. Mrs. Chen has been managing that estate ever since. DataStream Technologies was sold for over $1 billion, Leonard said slowly, his face going pale. That was all over the news years ago. 1.2 billion to be precise, James confirmed. After taxes, charitable giving, and investments, Mrs. Chen's current net worth is approximately $750 million. The room erupted. Victoria actually stumbled backward into a chair. Patricia made a sound like she couldn't breathe. Celeste went from pale to green, looking like she might be sick. That's not possible, Victoria stammered. You drive a Toyota. You dress like you live in a regular house. I live in the house my husband and I bought when we first got married, Margaret said calmly. I drive a reliable car. I wear comfortable clothes. None of that changes who I am or what I'm worth. But why? Diane asked, looking genuinely confused. Why would you live like that if you have that kind of money? Margaret's expression softened. My husband grew up poor. Really poor. He never forgot what that was like. And he made me promise that we'd never forget either. After he died, I decided to honor that promise by living simply and giving generously. I wanted to see the world as regular people see it, to understand their struggles, to know who was genuinely kind versus who was just being nice because they wanted something. And we failed that test spectacularly, Victoria whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. The gala where you seated me by the kitchen, Margaret continued, her voice steady but not unkind. The boutique where I was accused of being a thief and thrown out. The committee meeting where I was told I didn't have the right background or connections. Every single interaction showed me exactly who you all were when you thought I was nobody. Celeste was openly crying now. Oh my God. Oh my God, I threw you out of my store. I called security on you. You did, Margaret acknowledged. Patricia had her head in her hands. I told you to look at items in your price range. I physically pushed you away from that painting. I remember. Victoria stood up, shaking. I treated you like you were an inconvenience. Like you were beneath me. I said terrible things. You did, Margaret said again. All of you did in different ways. You judged me based on my appearance, my car, my clothes. You decided I had nothing to offer. You dismissed my ideas without consideration. You assigned me busy work to keep me out of the way. We're horrible people, Diane said quietly. Absolutely horrible. You're not horrible, Margaret replied. You're human. You made assumptions based on surface judgments. It happens every day all over the world. The difference is you have a chance to learn from it. James cleared his throat. Mrs. Chen has instructed me to make the committee an offer. She's willing to donate $10 million to the Women's Entrepreneurship Foundation. The room exploded again with gasps and shocked exclamations. Victoria was crying now too. 10 million? Leonard repeated. That would solve everything. That would save us and create an endowment for the future. But there are conditions. James continued, holding up his hand. Mrs. Chen believes the foundation does important work, but she also believes it needs significant changes to remain relevant and effective. What kind of changes? Victoria asked, wiping her eyes. Margaret stood up for the first time since the meeting began. First, the committee needs to be restructured. We need diverse voices at this table. That means women from different backgrounds, different socioeconomic levels, and especially women who have actually received grants from the foundation. The people you're helping should have a say in how you help them. The committee members nodded, some enthusiastically, others more hesitantly. Second, the events need to change. No more expensive galas that are really just social networking for the wealthy. We create meaningful events where donors actually meet the women they're supporting, see the impact of their donations, feel connected to the cause. That's what you suggested at the committee meeting, Diane said slowly. It is, and you all laughed at me. More nods, more shamefaced looks. Third, the foundation needs to be transparent about its finances and its impact. Real numbers, real stories, real accountability. People don't trust philanthropy anymore because too much of it is just theater. We're going to show them what genuine impact looks like. These are all good changes, Leonard said. Necessary changes, honestly. And finally, Margaret continued, I want each of you to think carefully about whether you want to remain involved. This won't be the same comfortable charity work you're used to. It will be real work. sometimes uncomfortable work. If you're just here for the social status, this isn't the place for you anymore.